Picture a state so vast that you can drive hours without passing more than a handful of homes. In this video, we're looking at the 9 least dense states in America, places that consistently sit at the bottom of population density rankings, and weighing their challenges against their opportunities. Even as the rest of the country grows, these states remain quiet and remote. But that emptiness hides some surprises. One of them is beginning to attract newcomers in unexpected ways. If you enjoy this kind of exploration, feel free to like the video and drop a comment on which quiet state you could see yourself living in. So why do these places stay empty, and what might finally change their path? To find out, let's start with one of the most striking examples. Montana's space without people. Montana stands out immediately because of its scale. The state covers more land than many European countries, yet its population is only about 1.13 million people. That imbalance makes it one of the least densely populated places in the United States. Its borders stretch across everything from rugged mountain ranges to sweeping plains, but between those landscapes are long stretches where nearly no one lives. From above, the map shows big patches of green and brown broken by only sparse dots of towns and small cities, each separated by miles of empty highway. The scenery plays a central role in Montana's identity. The Rocky Mountains dominate the west, while the east is defined by plains that seem to go on forever. Rivers thread through valleys and forests cover wide tracts of land. Visitors often think of the state as wild and unspoiled, and for many people that sense of openness is what makes it appealing. Yet the same vastness that draws new arrivals can also complicate life. Distance is a constant factor, whether measured in hours of driving, limited access to services, or the challenge of keeping communities connected. Weather in Montana creates another layer of difficulty. Summers can swing from warm, pleasant days to heat waves that leave farmland dry and vulnerable. In winter, conditions reverse. Temperatures regularly fall well below freezing, snowstorms build quickly, and strong winds sweep across exposed terrain. Heavy snowfall can shut down travel for days, and heating costs rise during months when the cold does not relent. Together, these seasonal extremes force residents to prepare for unpredictability, shaping a kind of resilience that marks everyday life across much of the state. Distance from amenities defines the routine for many families. A grocery run might involve a drive of 30 miles or more. Access to hospitals gets complicated outside larger urban centers, with some residents depending on helicopter flights or extended ambulance transports for advanced care. Educational opportunities are uneven, since universities are concentrated mainly in Bozeman, Missoula, and a few other hubs. Job markets reflect the same pattern. Agriculture, resource extraction, and service jobs remain spread thin across rural areas, while tech, finance, and professional sectors cluster around just a handful of communities. Still, shifts are underway. In recent years, remote work has given Montana a new visibility. As more jobs detached from office locations, certain counties began to grow. The strongest immigration has centered on Yellowstone County, which includes Billings, the state's largest city at just over 110,000 residents, along with Missoula County and parts of Gallatin County around Bozeman. Improvements in broadband access have allowed some families and professionals to relocate without giving up career options. Instead of being seen as isolated, these urban counties are increasingly described as lifestyle destinations, offering proximity to nature alongside enough infrastructure to support modern work. Bozeman in particular has become a symbol of that change. Once a small agricultural town, it has developed rapidly into a hub for tech startups, outdoor brands, and specialized services. Coffee shops now double as meeting spaces for remote software engineers and creative workers whose clients are spread across the country. Housing demand has spiked, and new construction has become routine on the edges of town. These changes signal how different Montana can look depending on where you stand. But those newcomers have created a problem. What is it? We'll explain in just a moment. The challenges become apparent when compared with the rest of the state. While Bozeman, Missoula, and Billings show signs of growth, many towns on the eastern plains continue to lose people. Job opportunities are limited, and younger residents often move away for college or work, rarely returning. Roads that stretch for hours across rangeland still lack fuel stops or convenience stores. In winter storms, snowplows face impossible distances to clear in reasonable time. Drought years hit ranchers hard, and some regional employers have closed instead of expanded. The uneven distribution of population and economic activity underscores why Montana retains such a low density overall. Even with growth in a few select cities, daily life in rural Montana remains defined by separation. Families keep emergency supplies and backup sources of heat. Many school districts serve only a handful of students, with graduating classes sometimes under 20. Community gatherings, fairs, or sports events are more than leisure. They are crucial social ties stretching across far distances. Life here requires planning and persistence, and most people adapt by relying on neighbors and networks that hold communities together despite physical space. For business operators, Montana presents opportunity combined with seasonal instability. National parks such as Glacier and Yellowstone attract millions during peak months, but visitor numbers can dip sharply in the off-season. Restaurants, guide services, and hotels often experience rapid boom and bust shifts depending on the calendar. Ranchers work with clean air and open ranges, though global commodity markets push down prices in ways local producers cannot fully control. Renewable energy potential, especially with wind and hydro, remains significant but requires long-term investment in transmission lines and support infrastructure before it can consistently add jobs at scale. The newcomers whose income often comes from elsewhere represent a different trend. Many arrive with remote careers in technology, design, or consulting, reducing their reliance on local employers. Some develop new ventures that bridge old and new economies, equipment companies that test outdoor gear in realistic conditions, digital platforms guiding tourists into the backcountry, or shared workspaces in small cities. This blending of tradition with modern industries is still modest in numbers, but it sets the stage for how Montana might continue to evolve without losing its defining characteristics. That evolution sparks debate among residents who have lived in the state for generations. To some, outside arrivals provide welcome energy and financial resources that diversify local economies beyond ranching and tourism. To others, rising housing costs in key counties feel like displacement, threatening affordability for families who grounded communities over decades. Rent in Bozeman or Missoula now rivals mid-sized urban areas across the United States, undercutting one of the main arguments long made for moving into Montana: open space paired with low cost of living. Despite these tensions, the sense of scale remains Montana's most defining feature. Even with surging growth in select cities, the overall numbers leave large stretches almost unoccupied. Compared with crowded metropolitan areas, even visible population increases here leave entire counties with fewer residents than a neighborhood in New York or Los Angeles. The experience for many visitors is not just towering peaks but long drives without radio reception, towns separated by dozens of miles, and an audible quiet broken only by weather or distant trains. Montana highlights both the attraction and burden of abundance. Its land feels infinite while its population feels small. Its seasons impose unpredictability while its towns adapt at different speeds. In its cities, newcomers shape a different future. In its rural spaces, conditions continue much as they have for generations. Both realities coexist within the same boundaries, and together they define why this state still ranks among the least dense in the nation. As one of the largest yet least populated places in America, Montana sets the stage for understanding other regions where land stretches wide, but people remain few. The story continues with another state where that imbalance is even sharper. Wyoming, America's quietest frontier. Wyoming is often described as America's quietest frontier, and the numbers show why. Despite spanning almost 100,000 square miles, its population sits at only about 580,000 people, making it the least populated state in the country. On average, just 6 people live across every square mile, leaving most of the land open, empty, and defined more by wildlife and rugged scenery than by human settlement. Driving across the state, you can pass mountain ranges, wide plains, and rolling desert, all with little sign of activity beyond a gas station or ranch house on the horizon. For residents, the quiet is part of daily life, but it comes with economic realities shaped by both nature and history. The foundations of Wyoming's economy have long rested on energy production and tourism. Under its surface lie some of the country's most extensive coal, oil, and natural gas reserves. Energy extraction built entire communities, most visibly around the Powder River Basin, where large-scale coal mining fueled state budgets and provided thousands of stable jobs. Local taxes from this industry helped fund schools, roads, and public services, so much so that for decades state finances rose and fell with fossil fuel markets. Added to this were public sector positions in government services, which provided stability in a state where private industries remained narrow. Tourism developed as the second pillar, centered on Yellowstone National Park, Grand Teton, and the mountains and valleys surrounding them. Millions of visitors arrive every summer, filling campsites, lodges, and hiking trails. Jackson Hole became the image of wealthy Western living, where luxury resorts stand a short distance from working cattle ranches. The contrast is striking. While Jackson thrives on high-end real estate and tourism, much of Wyoming still resembles small agricultural towns with pickup trucks and local diners lining main streets. But Wyoming's reliance on energy and tourism leaves it exposed. Coal production is slowly declining as natural gas and renewable energy gain market share nationally. Open-pit mines still operate, but they employ fewer workers each year. Younger residents often leave mining towns, hoping for opportunities elsewhere. Oil and gas add more unpredictability, with global price shifts dictating local employment. When oil prices dip, drilling slows, rigs are pulled, and small towns notice the strain immediately. State budgets fluctuate alongside these changes, creating cycles of prosperity followed by cuts. In short, much of Wyoming's economy has depended on two volatile industries, neither of which guarantees long-term stability. Tourism also faces limits. While visitor numbers peak in the summer and during ski season, Wyoming's harsh winters discourage off-season travel. Heavy snow or road closures cut into visitation, and wildfires or flooding have occasionally kept tourists away entirely. Jobs in tourism tend to be seasonal and lower paid, and most are concentrated in certain counties rather than spread evenly across the state. The luxurious Jackson picture is not how the majority of locals experience life, especially in rural towns far from the national parks. Because of this instability, Wyoming has begun exploring new avenues, particularly in renewable energy. Its geography, broad plains and steady winds, makes it ideal for wind projects. Carbon County, for example, hosts large wind farms whose turbines now send electricity into neighboring states like Colorado and Utah. Although renewables do yet rival extraction in total jobs, they represent visible growth in a part of the economy that signals diversification. Training programs are being introduced to prepare workers for jobs in maintenance and operations, serving as an early step toward redefining the state's identity. For Wyoming, even incremental gains matter, since they reduce dependence on coal revenues and reassure younger workers that new careers might exist locally. Tax policy remains another major tool Wyoming uses to draw residents. With no state income tax and some of the lowest overall tax rates in the nation, it is marketed as a haven for retirees, entrepreneurs, and remote workers. Combined with abundant land and relatively affordable housing in most towns outside Jackson Hole, the state offers a financially appealing option for people willing to trade urban conveniences for open landscapes. Broadband infrastructure, long a weakness, is receiving new investment, and this has supported a modest rise in remote professionals relocating to growth centers like Cheyenne and Laramie. Even so, the challenges of living here often outweigh the benefits for many. Hospitals can be hours apart, high schools serve tiny student bodies, and winter closures can delay travel for days. Entertainment and cultural activities remain limited to a few urban pockets, and university-level academic opportunities concentrate around Laramie. These realities keep Wyoming attractive only to certain types of residents: the independent, self-sufficient, and those willing to adapt to a slower pace of life. Still, the trade-off between low taxes and limited services sparks debate. Later in this Wyoming segment, we'll unpack one striking example of how these trade-offs actually play out for families, from tax savings to housing costs, so stick around for that. In national context, Wyoming's quietness feels even sharper when you compare its resident population to its visitor traffic. Yellowstone alone receives over 4 million visitors per year, nearly 8 times the number of people who live in the entire state. Tourists flock to the geysers and mountains, but few seek to settle down permanently. That gap, high visitation rates paired with extremely low residency, is central to Wyoming's paradox. Millions appreciate it, but far fewer call it home. The growing field of renewable energy may change the situation slowly. Expansion of wind farms seems minor compared to decades of coal dominance, but the potential is real. If new projects create skilled jobs that keep young workers from leaving, and if expanded energy exports stabilize state budgets, even gradual progress could give Wyoming a more secure future. The wide basins that once defined coal power may now host the equipment of an emerging energy landscape, suggesting continuity through change. Still, the view from most roads remains unchanged. Small towns separated by miles of rangeland, ranches tucked into valleys, and long, mostly empty highways. For many residents, that landscape is what makes Wyoming worth staying in. Independence and space shape community values. Events like county fairs and rodeos link far-flung towns together, and a sense of resilience grows from coping with harsh winters and limited resources. Yet the very features locals embrace continue to limit broader growth. That tension between preserving an identity and seeking economic renewal defines much of Wyoming's current path. In the end, Wyoming embodies the extremes of what it means to be sparsely populated. Its land is vast, but its communities remain few. Its economy depends on boom and bust cycles, yet it shows early movement toward adaptation. Open space still dominates daily life, but symbols of modern change, wind turbines, broadband cables, shifting demographics, are beginning to appear. The balance between tradition and adaptation remains fragile, but even subtle progress suggests Wyoming may not remain defined by coal alone. This perspective on sparseness highlights how some states hold steady in quiet isolation, while others are starting to shift under modern pressures. In the next case, we see a state with a much smaller footprint, one that's gaining new attention for very different reasons. Vermont rural charm meets rising popularity. Vermont stands out as one of the smallest states in both geography and population, yet in recent years it has gained attention for reasons beyond its size. Since the pandemic, it has quietly reshaped itself from a primarily tourist destination into a place that more people are now choosing to live. Its reputation for calm scenery and close-knit towns has always been part of the draw. But what differentiates Vermont today is how changes in work and lifestyle patterns have altered the balance of who arrives, who stays, and what it means to live there. The state's traditional image revolves around pastoral charm. Rolling hills lined with barns, maple syrup production in spring, ski resorts in the Green Mountains in winter, and town centers built around family-run shops have long defined its identity. Small towns rarely feature major national chains. Instead, communities are stitched together through long-standing relationships and local businesses. Those features built Vermont's reputation as a slow-paced retreat from urban life, and they remain visible. But beneath the postcard image, the story has shifted. For decades, Vermont faced the challenge of limited population growth. Many young adults who grew up there left to pursue strong careers elsewhere, and the state often lacked the industries needed to bring them back. Agriculture, forestry, and small-scale manufacturing anchored the economy, while the ski industry and seasonal tourism provided stability but rarely year-round economic opportunity. That pattern kept Vermont steady but not expanding. Families found that beyond tourism-related jobs and government services, there were relatively few professional pathways. Housing costs added another obstacle. Visitors often assume that small towns equal affordability, but Vermont's reality differs. The presence of second-home buyers combined with limited housing supply elevated prices beyond many local incomes. Property taxes remained high compared with most states, while cold winters translated to significant heating costs. Even basics like groceries were often more expensive than in larger centers due to transportation distances. The result was a long-standing perception. Vermont was an excellent place to visit, but difficult for many working families to settle in permanently. That perception began to change in the early 2020s. Remote work created an opening Vermont had never fully experienced before. When professionals were no longer tied to offices in Boston or New York, places that seemed impractical suddenly became options. Towns long defined by flat or declining populations started to see small but measurable inflows. By 2025, the shift is visible in both state statistics and the lived experience of residents. Burlington, Vermont's largest city, totals about 42,000 residents, tiny compared to most urban centers, but it stands as a clear example of how Vermont has drawn in new arrivals. Entire counties surrounding Burlington, along with ski-adjacent towns in the Green Mountains, now reflect stronger housing demand. The newcomers tend to include professionals with remote-friendly jobs, families seeking smaller and safer communities, and retirees interested in an active outdoor lifestyle. Schools that once struggled with declining enrollment now present small class sizes as a strength. Parents point to safety rankings, which consistently place Vermont among the most secure states in the country. Even though in-migration numbers remain modest compared to national growth hotspots in the South or West, for Vermont, the turnaround is striking. Daily life reflects this adjustment. Coffee shops in Burlington or Montpelier now serve as weekday workspaces rather than just weekend meeting spots. Rural areas have experimented with co-working centers that provide reliable internet access. Community-supported agriculture has connected new arrivals with long-established farms, blending traditional agriculture with new consumer bases. The growth does not erase Vermont's rural character, but it layers digital work and outside income streams onto a framework once dominated by tourism and farming. The economic benefits are tempered by renewed pressure on housing markets. Properties that were once steady in price have risen significantly. A modest single-family home in a ski-town valley may now cost several times the annual income of a local teacher or mechanic. Newcomers, often earning salaries tied to metropolitan cost of living, can outbid local residents for limited housing stock. This tension highlights the challenge facing Vermont. Every gain in economic vitality can coincide with erosion in affordability. For small communities, even a few higher-income households can set off noticeable shifts in pricing. Still, the qualities drawing people in have consistency. Vermont's environmental values align with many remote professionals' preferences. Recycling, environmental protections, renewable energy initiatives, and broad access to outdoor recreation form part of daily culture. Small-scale renewable energy, particularly solar projects and community installations, has grown in recent years and adds an additional dimension to the local economy. Education anchors some professional opportunities through colleges and universities that sustain research, healthcare support, and niche tech-related positions. Vermont is not a technology hub in the traditional sense, but it has carved out focused spaces where digital work connects with rural needs. Cultural dynamics are evolving as well. Farmers' markets that once operated quietly now serve larger crowds of both longtime residents and arrivals from nearby states. Local school boards and town meetings have gained members with professional backgrounds beyond Vermont's traditional industries, broadening the scope of local decision-making. Housing policy, broadband internet expansion, and environmental management now dominate community debates in ways rarely seen 2 decades ago. The result is a hybrid character. Vermont maintains its small-town identity while adapting incrementally to issues tied to greater visibility. For young professionals, the balance is compelling. Vermont provides quick access to outdoor activities, minimal commute times, and a community environment in which social life often centers on shared local events. Small towns may lack extensive entertainment, but they offer a rootedness that residents often find missing in large cities. Families add momentum by stabilizing school systems and supporting small businesses that depend on consistent local demand. In a state where population totals are modest, even small increases in stability have outsized significance. Yet friction remains. Higher-income newcomers exacerbate long-term housing shortages. Healthcare infrastructure cannot expand rapidly given the small tax base and geographic limitations. And the scale of Vermont simply prevents explosive growth. Most residents prefer it that way, but it limits how far in-migration trends can go before they collide with infrastructure capacity. That restraint reinforces the idea that growth in Vermont proceeds at a slow, measured pace, shaped by collective decisions at the town and regional level. By 2025, Vermont illustrates how one of the country's smallest states can shift from stagnation to renewal without ever losing its rural core. Unlike larger frontier states, Vermont's story is not about vast emptiness, but about how limited space can adjust to modest but meaningful inflows. The charm associated with maple syrup farms and Green Mountain winter sports still defines much of daily life. At the same time, the integration of remote work, sustainability, and quality of life motivations shows how a rural state can attract new households without abandoning its traditions. The lesson extends beyond Vermont's borders. A small state once tagged as stable, but aging is now referenced as a case study in sustainable rural living. The emptiness does not vanish. Population density remains low compared to national levels. But that emptiness is reinterpreted as an asset, space that supports stronger community ties while allowing selective adaptation to modern trends. This progress, however, exposes a recurring limitation. As Vermont becomes more desirable, housing affordability strains long-term residents. That dynamic is not unique to Vermont. Other sparsely populated states also wrestle with what happens when even a modest inflow of new households collides with existing housing supply. The next example illustrates a version of this problem from a different angle, where geography and economy shape constraints in another way. North Dakota, oil fields and isolation. North Dakota shows one of the clearest examples of how a vast landscape can exist alongside a very small population. The state stretches across wide plains and farmland, yet only about 780,000 to 800,000 people live here. That number places it firmly under 1 million residents, ranking near the bottom nationally for population size and density. Most people are concentrated around Fargo in Cass County, which has roughly 118,000 residents, while the capital, Bismarck, sits just above 70,000. Beyond those anchors, long highways cross farmland and small towns, reinforcing how lightly populated the state feels. The climate plays a central part in shaping life. Winters in North Dakota are severe, with temperatures often dropping far below zero and wind chills pushing conditions into dangerous territory. Blizzards can last days, closing roads and isolating rural communities until equipment clears the way. Snowfall extends well into spring, while summers swing to the other extreme, warm stretches broken by thunderstorms, hail, or flooding. These sharp contrasts increase costs for heating, transportation, and maintenance, and they shape a way of life that discourages people who hope for milder environments. For those who do stay, enduring the extremes becomes a matter of adaptation more than preference. Economics adds another defining element. For much of its history, North Dakota's backbone was agriculture. Wheat, corn, and livestock production remain central, but larger and more mechanized farms have reduced the number of families directly working the land. These consolidations leave fewer households spread across larger properties, magnifying the impression of emptiness. Many towns that once supported clusters of family farms now struggle with shrinking populations as younger generations move away. That story shifted dramatically with the discovery and development of oil reserves in the Bakken Formation during the 2010s. Western North Dakota experienced rapid transformation as energy companies and workers flooded into communities near Williston and Dickinson. Once quiet towns filled with traffic, man camps, and temporary housing. Local businesses thrived, tax revenues jumped, and families who had known decades of gradual decline suddenly saw prosperity at their doorsteps. For a state so defined by low density, it was a striking moment when the population actually grew at a visible pace. But oil's volatility soon revealed itself. The global drop in prices cut drilling activity, and rigs that had once employed thousands shut down quickly. Families who had moved for the boom packed up just as suddenly, leaving towns dotted with half-empty housing projects and businesses no longer able to survive. Empty hotels and unused worker camps became reminders of how quickly fortunes change when tied to a single resource. This boom-and-bust rhythm left many cautious about long-term expectations. Oil remains a critical driver, but it does not guarantee stability. Even so, the state has moved to diversify. Agriculture, still central, is now incorporating agro-tech solutions to modernize. Large operations employ drones, soil sensors, and data platforms to improve yields and conserve resources. These tools reflect a growing role for companies specializing in agricultural technology, with North Dakota serving as a test bed for innovation on large tracts of farmland. Precision farming and robotics not only support local producers, but also create career paths beyond traditional agriculture. To encourage these changes, broadband expansion has become a priority. For decades, limited connectivity reinforced North Dakota's sense of isolation, especially in rural counties. Investments in high-speed internet now aim to attract entrepreneurs, support remote workers, and make digital industries more viable in smaller communities. For younger families considering relocation, reliable internet access has proved almost as important as physical infrastructure. With fields stretching miles in every direction, rural settings also provide space for companies to test machinery and software in real-world conditions without the congestion found elsewhere. Energy diversification adds another layer. North Dakota is consistently ranked among the states with the greatest potential for wind power, thanks to strong and steady winds across its plains. In recent years, turbines have appeared alongside farms and oil rigs, supplying electricity to both in-state demands and regional grids. Wind projects require fewer workers than oil, but they establish stable operations that do not fluctuate with global petroleum markets. While not yet close to replacing the revenue from fossil fuels, these projects show how the state can adapt to a changing national energy picture. For residents, all of these efforts spark varied reactions. Those in oil country recall both the benefits and the setbacks of the boom. While grateful for opportunities the industry provided, many remain wary of promises that energy or technology will bring lasting stability. Farmers experiencing the growth of agro-tech recognize the efficiencies, but also see how rising automation reduces certain jobs, adding to concerns about consolidation. Yet optimism exists that by blending agriculture with data-driven models, North Dakota could find stability in a field that builds on its traditional strengths while looking forward. Still, the demographic picture remains sparse. Outside the Fargo region and Cass County, populations remain thin. Grand Forks, despite hosting the University of North Dakota, is modest compared to college towns in other parts of the country. Beyond these hubs, some counties hold more cattle than people. Towns rely on tight community bonds, but reaching schools, hospitals, or shopping centers often requires drives of an hour or more. For families deciding where to stay long-term, that distance can be discouraging. The climate continues to deter many from moving in. Sub-zero winters demand extensive heating and stress infrastructure, while road closures leave residents isolated. Summers, although shorter, present their own challenges in the form of storm damage. While some value that rugged isolation, most view it as a practical difficulty. Broadly accessible technology or economic expansion cannot fully overcome the realities of weather, leaving the state appealing mainly to those who accept these extremes for the trade-off of space and affordability. Looking at 2025, though the population mix is more balanced than before, remote workers represent a small but growing share of newcomers. Some university graduates are choosing to stay, enticed by new opportunities in technology, energy, or research fields. Families attracted by affordable land find high-speed internet sufficient for jobs that once required an urban address. While the net increase is limited compared to national patterns, for North Dakota, each smaller gain feels meaningful. The picture ahead shows how the state may redefine itself. Imagery of oil derricks may persist, but alongside them, high-tech farming, broadband networks, and renewable energy will increasingly shape the narrative. North Dakota does not need rapid growth to matter. Its role in agriculture and energy, supported by technological integration, gives it significance even without a dense population. The question remains whether those evolving industries can bring enough permanence to offset instability and make residency more attractive for future generations. Even with the progress, North Dakota maintains its distinction as a place of great land and few people. Vast sections remain quiet, winter storms still blanket highways, and long drives across the plains reinforce its reputation for openness. Yet where emptiness once hinted at irrelevance, the combination of agro-tech innovation, energy diversification, and stronger digital infrastructure now suggests a new purpose. As this shift takes place, it invites comparisons with other states across the northern plains, places with similar geography but different approaches to growth. That broader context helps explain why some areas remain empty while others begin to attract new activity. South Dakota, land of space and minimal people. South Dakota stands in the center of the country, a state with plenty of land but relatively few people. Despite being larger than many nations, its total population is just around 920,000 to 930,000, less than some single metropolitan areas elsewhere in the United States. Driving across its long highways highlights the gap immediately. A scattering of towns, wide prairies stretching to the horizon, and cities that feel modest by national standards. Even the largest, Sioux Falls, has under 200,000 residents, while Rapid City on the western side remains under 80,000. Between these anchors, most of the state feels defined more by land than by people. That contrast becomes even sharper when you compare east and west. The eastern half of South Dakota is fertile farmland, with grain fields, barns, and rows of silos that dominate the horizon. Cross the Missouri River and the landscape shifts, the ground grows rougher, ranching takes over, and the Badlands carve dramatic ridges across otherwise empty plains. Small towns lie far apart, and distances between neighbors stretch wider as you move westward. This split reflects not only geography, but how communities form, and how far people must travel for basic goods and services. For young residents growing up here, that environment shapes difficult choices. Higher education and job opportunities are limited within the state, so many leave for Minneapolis, Denver, or farther afield. Larger cities offer professional prospects and cultural experiences that South Dakota simply cannot match. This pattern has repeated across decades, keeping population totals low despite the land available. Families that remain often find themselves weighing whether to stay long-term, particularly if jobs in their chosen fields are scarce. The lack of major cities continues to be one of South Dakota's biggest hurdles. Sioux Falls and Rapid City provide employment in healthcare, retail, and agricultural processing, but beyond them, most counties rely heavily on farming, ranching, or tourism. That makes it difficult to retain younger generations. Students graduate with ambitions that stretch far beyond what small communities can provide. Demographically, the balance tilts older as younger people leave, leading to shrinking schools, declining enrollments, and dependence on aging residents to keep local institutions active. Some counties are experimenting with incentives to counteract the trend. Relocation programs have included moving stipends, assistance with housing, or help connecting newcomers to jobs in teaching or healthcare. In some areas, loan repayment programs encourage professionals to stay for several years, easing shortages in critical fields. While these policies do not erase the structural challenges of remoteness, they signal a willingness to test strategies that might stabilize population decline in targeted communities. Tourism is one of the state's most recognized strengths. Mount Rushmore continues to attract millions of visitors, making it one of America's most iconic landmarks. The Black Hills, with their forests and winding roads, bring steady summer traffic, while the Badlands remain a striking destination for travelers drawn to their unusual rock formations. A place like Wall Drug, promoted by countless roadside billboards, keeps alive South Dakota's quirky roadside culture. But for all the visibility, tourism work is seasonal. Jobs disappear in the winter, and the benefits concentrate around specific regions rather than being widely shared across the state. As a result, communities distant from the Black Hills or popular attractions still struggle to maintain steady income. Where South Dakota has carved out a distinctive advantage is through its tax structure. With no personal or corporate income tax, it offers a low-cost environment for businesses and entrepreneurs. That gives smaller ventures room to grow in ways that would be financially difficult elsewhere. Local owners find that warehouses, workshops, or storefronts can be leased affordably. In Sioux Falls, particular gains have shown up in service industries and small tech outfits, while rural towns support manufacturing tied to agriculture or natural resources. The pool of customers may be smaller because of the state's population, but low overhead makes survival possible. Improved internet access has reinforced these shifts. High-speed broadband has reached more communities than in past decades, allowing remote workers and entrepreneurs to base themselves in rural areas. That removes one of the major barriers for digital employment. Instead of moving away to find jobs, some residents now import work electronically. While not yet a mass movement, these changes broaden the types of careers feasible in South Dakota. Still, emptiness remains a defining feature. Sparse populations lead to school closures, reduced health care options, and limited retail. Locals often drive hours just to reach larger stores or medical facilities. During snowstorms or extreme cold, these journeys become even more challenging, leaving households isolated. Living here demands planning ahead and storing essentials. Community ties soften the isolation, but the distances remain. For many, that reality outweighs the benefits of lower costs. On the other hand, South Dakota's openness appeals to those who value independence and affordability. With ample land and low regulatory and financial barriers, people willing to accept fewer amenities can build businesses, raise families, or settle into a slower way of life. Entrepreneurs in particular see opportunity in the space. Room to build breweries, local farms, outdoor recreation services, or craft industries with limited competition. In a small town, even a single startup can shift the economic landscape, offering jobs and creating new social spaces. That incremental growth stands in contrast to the volatile experiences of oil-producing neighbors. Where North Dakota saw boom and bust cycles tied to energy markets, South Dakota moves gradually. Its economy relies on steady, smaller adjustments in tourism, small business, and affordability rather than dramatic leaps. That slower pace may not generate headlines, but it provides stability. Communities can change shape noticeably even if the overall population numbers barely move. Ultimately, South Dakota's challenge is not whether it will remain sparsely populated. It almost certainly will, but how emptiness is interpreted. For some, it is a liability that drives out young people and limits opportunity. For others, it is an asset that provides freedom, affordability, and room to establish new paths without intense competition. That tension defines the state in 2025. Is South Dakota's emptiness a problem to solve or a feature to be marketed? The question echoes forward, setting the stage for another state where wide land, harsh conditions, and a small population collide with new pressures. Maine forests, winters, and new people moving in. Maine tells a different version of the sparse population story. With about 1.4 million residents spread across a large state, density averages only around 43 people per square mile. Most of this population clusters in the southern corridor around Portland and along the coast, leaving the rest of the state, especially the north, remarkably quiet. Drive inland and towns thin until you find only scattered villages and isolated farmhouses framed by endless stretches of forest. In several northern counties, population levels are lower today than they were generations ago, a quiet decline visible in empty downtown storefronts and half-filled schools. Most of Maine beyond its southern cities is heavily forested. Spruce and pine dominate the horizon, and long sections of the interior are marked more by woods than by people. This rugged character has always framed the state both as an outdoor haven and a challenge for year-round life. On paper, Maine looks idyllic. Rocky coastlines, fishing harbors that trace back centuries, and a vast wilderness unbroken by major development. Yet those same qualities that define its beauty also explain why population density has remained low. In practice, limited transportation, long distances between services, and seasonal hardship make settling here a decision only some are willing to undertake. Harsh winters reinforce those barriers. Cold arrives early and stays long, shaping routines across much of the state. In January, days are short, temperatures routinely sink below freezing, and snow or ice can lock small towns in place until roads are cleared. For families in rural areas, preparing for months of low mobility is a necessity. Heating costs climb steeply, schools and businesses lose days to storms, and trips for groceries or medical care turn into logistical challenges. Residents endure, but for those considering relocation, the severity still discourages many. Climate change has added a new layer to this picture. Recent years brought somewhat milder winters in parts of southern Maine, reducing the stretches of deep freeze that once made daily life difficult. Small improvements in seasonal livability have removed at least one barrier for newcomers, but this shift carries trade-offs. Rising seas are already pressuring coastal communities, flooding events are more frequent, and insurance markets reflect that risk with higher premiums in vulnerable areas. Ocean warming disrupts fishing stocks, threatening industries that have anchored Maine's economy for centuries. The result is a double-edged climate story. Slightly easier winters for residents, but worsening conditions along the very coastlines that attract both visitors and new arrivals. Despite these challenges, Maine has begun to draw attention from groups who once overlooked it. Retirees from Boston, New York, and other metro regions increasingly purchase homes in southern counties, especially near Portland. For them, the math is simple. A property that would be priced far higher closer to the city comes with coastal scenery and a slower pace of life in Maine. With modern heating, good road maintenance, and insulated housing, winters feel more manageable than before. After decades of working in dense regions, many retirees embrace the space that Maine offers. Alongside retirees, remote professionals are changing the picture in visible ways. Broadband expansion has reached areas that were once effectively disconnected, and this infrastructure made the state viable for people who work in digital fields. Tech consultants, writers, and designers who once commuted into urban centers can base themselves in waterfront properties or inland towns. For these residents, Maine's quiet is not an obstacle but a resource that pairs productivity with access to recreation. Hiking trails, kayaking, and fishing are only minutes away, balancing work with lifestyle in a way that urban centers cannot match. Portland has become the hub of this trend. The city itself still has a modest population, around 67,000, but in the regional context it serves as a magnet. Known now for its restaurant scene, co-working spaces, and arts community, Portland attracts a steady influx of younger professionals and entrepreneurs. One local workspace operator described how members log into firms spread across the country while gathering in a city still small enough that people know one another by name. Housing prices have reflected this attention, climbing steadily yet remaining lower than what professionals would pay in Boston or New York. Spillover reaches into surrounding towns, where demand for property rises each year from people priced out of Portland proper. Bangor and communities along Penobscot Bay show similar, smaller-scale growth, reversing years of stagnant demand. Northern and rural towns are also feeling modest changes. A few dozen new families can transform small communities where only a few hundred residents remained. Remote income streams allow households to settle in areas where conventional local jobs are scarce. In turn, these families support grocery stores, schools, and local businesses that otherwise face shrinking customer bases. Tax rolls strengthen, class sizes stabilize, and storefronts reopen. While the scale is limited compared to national growth hotspots, in a state where even a small shift shows up quickly, these arrivals make a noticeable difference. Maine's affordability, however, brings mixed outcomes. While homes are far cheaper than in other northeastern states, limited housing supply amplifies competition. When retirees and remote workers arrive with higher incomes or urban-based salaries, they outbid younger locals for properties. In some towns, longtime residents express concern that their children will not be able to afford settling nearby. Communities face the dual challenge of welcoming economic activity while protecting affordability for families already embedded in the region. That balance is delicate, and its outcomes will shape how sustainable Maine's population shifts prove to be. Cultural life is part of the adjustment. Breweries, artisanal shops, and regional festivals have multiplied, catering to both newcomers and locals. Portland's growth spreads opportunities into nearby areas, and more rural towns benefit from small but steady activity. Farmers markets, once primarily serving longtime residents, now attract new households interested in sustainability and local food. School boards and town meetings see new members with professional backgrounds outside Maine's traditional industries. Altogether, the shift is incremental but reshapes how communities define themselves. Quality of life is the consistent motivator. Families appreciate low crime rates and smaller class sizes that let teachers know every student personally. Professionals prize short commute times or no commute at all paired with outdoor recreation. Retirees value slower rhythms and community bonds stronger than those in large cities. These motivators always existed, but only now do technology and changing work culture allow them to drive tangible migration. For Maine, this combination of improved connectivity and lifestyle appeal is rewriting the narrative around its emptiness. Nevertheless, the state remains overwhelmingly quiet when compared to most of the country. In the interior, there are still vast stretches of forest where you might not pass another vehicle for miles. Entire counties continue to measure residents in numbers far below national averages. Maine remains at the low end of U.S. density tables, but the meaning of that emptiness is changing. No longer only a sign of economic decline, it becomes a form of potential. Rural spaces absorb new activity, and silence is reinterpreted as an asset. By 2025, Maine's population remains small, and winters still impose costs, yet inflows of retirees and remote workers mark a shift away from stagnation. The forests, rivers, and coastlines that defined hardship for earlier generations are now attracting people who measure prosperity by balance, connection, and space. Growth is gradual rather than explosive, but in a state of Maine's size, that is enough to alter the long-term trajectory. The story shows that a state can remain sparsely populated yet slowly gain strength as conditions and motivations change. And while Maine demonstrates how natural beauty and lifestyle can draw new residents, the next example highlights a different puzzle, one where people are relatively few, but business presence is overwhelming on paper. Delaware empty and people full of corporations. Delaware illustrates a very different kind of emptiness, one that shows up in its people but not in its paperwork. The state is widely known as the registration hub for American business, a place where countless companies anchor their legal filings. Corporate lawyers point to Delaware's established court system and favorable business laws as the reason so much financial activity runs through it. Yet this reputation contrasts with the reality on the ground, where just over 1 million residents call Delaware home. It is small in size, small in population, and despite its busy reputation on paper, it feels far quieter than the corporate statistics suggest. For those who live here, the contrast is immediate. Wilmington, with around 71,000 residents, is the largest city in the state, but next to Philadelphia, only a short drive away, it looks modest. Dover, the capital, remains even smaller with under 40,000 residents. Beyond those two urban centers are small towns and lightly populated stretches of farmland. From the southern reaches of Sussex County to the towns that mark the state line with Maryland, much of the landscape is relatively subdued. People outside the region often associate Delaware only with banks, credit cards, and business registrations, but everyday life here runs at a much slower pace. The reason for this image lies squarely in the state's legal framework. Delaware has cultivated a reputation for decades as the go-to destination for company incorporation. Its corporate court system, widely respected for its clarity and predictability, makes it a preferred choice for firms of all sizes, from tech giants to small startups. Tax treatment for businesses adds to the appeal, creating a system where corporations can establish themselves here without necessarily operating here. The result is a large number of registered entities tied to Delaware addresses, giving the state outsized importance in American business law. But it is important to separate this legal bookkeeping from the experience of residents. Companies may hold Delaware registrations, but that does not mean they are providing new jobs within the state's borders. For ordinary families, the economy feels far narrower. Finance and legal services provide opportunity, but other sectors are less robust. Manufacturing, technology, and healthcare employment all look stronger in neighboring states like Pennsylvania or New Jersey, causing many younger professionals to work outside Delaware even when they choose to live within it. Wages in several fields track below regional averages, and while jobs exist, the pipeline of varied career options is smaller. This mismatch contributes to the paradox. Delaware looks full of corporate activity when judged by paperwork, but the actual labor market feels constrained. This tension has guided state leaders to a gradual shift in strategy. Relying on incorporation fees and corporate law will sustain Delaware on the books but not guarantee vibrant communities. As a result, policymakers have looked toward livability as the next growth path. Efforts spotlight retirees as one major source of potential residents. Compared with nearby New Jersey, housing prices are lower in many parts of Delaware. The beaches around Rehoboth and Bethany, paired with tax advantages and relatively lower costs, make retirement here more feasible for people who want proximity to major metropolitan regions without paying big city prices. For seniors with fixed incomes, Delaware checks practical boxes while also offering shoreline access that feels like a bonus. A second audience is remote professionals. Broadband expansion, strengthened since the early 2020s, has spread opportunities for those who can work from home. The pitch is simple. Delaware gives you quiet, modestly priced communities, yet it is within day-trip distance of New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington. DC, the ability to sit in a small town during the week while still reaching an office occasionally has become attractive for a modest but noticeable wave of newcomers. Towns that once struggled with population stagnation are gaining households that bring income from outside while still spending dollars locally. Community upgrades reinforce this approach. Waterfront investments, bike trail systems, and local cultural programs are designed to make towns more appealing to potential movers. Because Delaware is geographically compact, these initiatives can take hold quickly, applying small changes across the state in a way that would be logistically more difficult for larger areas. Residents benefit from these improvements, but they also spark questions. Every new arrival, whether retiree or remote worker, fits into existing housing markets and daily routines. For some towns, the simultaneous rise in demand has pushed local prices up, frustrating residents who see homes slipping out of reach. Concerns about affordability are particularly clear in Sussex County near the beaches. Once considered a quiet stretch with lower-cost living, these towns increasingly market themselves as retirement and vacation destinations. As wealthier households purchase real estate, the costs climb. Longtime locals worry that their children will not be able to return after college or will instead relocate to areas with more accessible housing. Similar conversations recur across small towns elsewhere in Delaware. Growth brings attention, but it also strains affordability and the sense of local continuity. Living in rural Delaware has begun to evolve as a result of broadband and lifestyle shifts. Small towns farther from Wilmington or Dover, long bypassed by younger households, now see limited but meaningful growth. Remote professionals bring incomes that exceed local averages, keeping small businesses afloat or spurring services that might otherwise have disappeared. A grocery store that might have closed gains new customers. A school maintains enrollment levels rather than consolidating. Even on a small scale, these changes register in a state whose overall population is just past 1 million. Still, the image of Delaware remains remarkably difficult to change. For many Americans, the word Delaware calls to mind incorporation more than community. Visitors driving through do not find skyscrapers or massive industrial campuses. They find suburban corridors, modest towns, and farmland. The gap between reputation and reality is striking and not easy to resolve. Laws keep corporations rooted here on paper, but they do not automatically anchor more households or foster rapid job creation within Delaware's borders. For many families, this leaves the state overshadowed by the larger economies around it. At the same time, Delaware's small geography is an unusual resource. It lacks wilderness on the scale of western states or landmarks like Yellowstone to draw tourists. Its assets are smaller but recognizable: unforgettable access to the Atlantic shore, a central location in the dense northeast corridor, and rules of governance that have brought decades of stability. The ongoing project is to present those assets in a way that attracts not just corporations, but also households. A marketing pitch built around small but livable. Residents already see some of the benefits. Parks are better maintained, cultural programming has grown, and many communities feel improvements in safety and services. But the state's limits are clear. Without a broader shift in job opportunities, Delaware's appeal will remain strongest for groups who do not depend heavily on the local economy: retirees with pensions, remote workers earning salaries elsewhere, or commuters plugged into Philadelphia, Baltimore, or Washington. For younger professionals wanting vibrant industry clusters close at hand, the state still lags behind nearby giants. By 2025, the emptiness of Delaware reads differently depending on perspective. On ledgers, it appears vibrant. Almost every major U.S. firm has ties here. On the ground, its towns remain small, its cities modest in comparison, and its overall population sparse. This dual image creates a state that feels paradoxical, busier in records than in person. And for anyone thinking about relocating, the core question remains: why do corporations choose Delaware for incorporation, but not necessarily bring jobs or major offices here? That puzzle sits at the center of Delaware's identity, and in a moment we'll look at the straightforward answer. But before that, consider what emptiness looks like in a part of the country where size itself sets the terms. Some states do not balance corporate paperwork against populations of 1 million, they grapple instead with land so overwhelming, and conditions so severe that emptiness feels almost inevitable. Alaska, enormous but almost empty. Alaska pushes the idea of emptiness to its extreme. It is the largest state in the nation by far, covering more land than Texas and California combined, yet its population is just about 733,000 people. That means fewer people live here than in many mid-sized U.S. cities, spread out across a landmass that makes up 1/6 of the country. With only around 1 to 1.3 people per square mile, it is the very definition of enormous but almost empty. This mismatch between size and population density sets the stage for everything else about Alaska. Anchorage holds close to 290,000 residents, making it by far the state's largest city. Yet even there, the surroundings stretch out into wilderness. Drive a short distance from the city, and the urban grid quickly gives way to towering mountains, boreal forests, and long stretches of road that disappear into undeveloped land. Move further away, and many settlements are not accessible by car at all. Alaska's road network is tiny relative to its land area. Most communities rely on aircraft, ferries, or seasonal transport routes to maintain contact with the rest of the state. For millions of acres of land, there are no highways linking towns together. Where other states define rural by long drives, Alaska defines it by the need for a plane ticket. The climate deepens this sense of distance. Winters reach down to -40 degrees in some places, locking the ground in frozen layers for months. Snowfall is heavy and can linger well into late spring, making daily transportation difficult. Residents spend a large part of the year preparing shelters, insulating pipes, and working to keep vehicles usable in frigid conditions. Daylight adds another challenge. Far northern areas spend entire weeks in winter darkness, while even the southern parts of the state see only a few hours of sun in December. These conditions weigh on both physical infrastructure and mental health, often discouraging newcomers unused to such extremes. Together, the cold, the darkness, and the distances place hard limits on large-scale population growth. Infrastructure reflects the challenge directly. Away from Anchorage, Fairbanks, or Juneau, many towns remain dependent on small-scale systems. Power may come from local generators or renewable projects designed for isolated grids. Food and supplies often arrive by plane or barge, which means grocery costs are much higher than the national average. a gallon of milk in an interior village can cost double or triple what it does in the lower 48 states. Healthcare access is another major barrier. Many communities only have small clinics, and emergencies often require airlifts to larger hospitals. For families considering a move, these logistical constraints become more than an inconvenience. They shape whether living in Alaska is possible in the first place. Despite these difficulties, Alaska has always drawn attention for its resources. Oil production transformed the state's economy in the late 20th century, centered around the massive reserves of the North Slope and the construction of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. Profits from oil boosted Alaska's budget so much that the state created the Permanent Fund, which pays dividends to residents. For decades, oil kept public programs running and gave households extra income. Alongside oil, tourism has served as the other major industry. Cruise ships bring waves of visitors into coastal towns each summer, while travelers from around the world come to see Denali, the glaciers, and the vast wilderness. These sectors made Alaska visible internationally, but they did not substantially raise the state's population. Both industries fluctuate with economic cycles and remain either seasonal or dependent on global commodity markets. The 2010s showed how fragile this balance can be. When global oil prices fell, state revenues dropped sharply, forcing budget cuts despite years of abundance. Visitors slowed during the pandemic, nearly freezing local tourism economies that had become reliant on summer traffic. These reminders reinforced Alaska's long-standing challenge. Its economy is strong in boom times but vulnerable to downturns. Without a more diverse set of opportunities, many young people continue to live in search of steadier careers in the lower 48. Recently, new possibilities have emerged, though all on a modest scale. Renewable energy is one area of growth. Alaska's long coast provides steady winds that have already supported small-scale wind projects, while rivers and glacial runoff enable hydroelectric facilities for local power grids. Expanding these projects reduces dependence on imported diesel fuel, which is both expensive and unstable when transport is delayed. Military presence is another stabilizing factor. Bases located in Alaska hold strategic importance due to proximity to the Arctic and the Pacific, and they provide consistent employment that does not rise and fall with commodity markets. Unlike oil and tourism, federal installations sustain local economies year-round. Together, renewable projects and the military offer signs of balance in an otherwise unpredictable economic picture. Living in Alaska also appeals to a specific kind of resident. Some people choose it for adventure, the opportunity to live in a place defined by extremes and wilderness rather than by convenience and density. Others value the resources, living off the land through fishing, hunting, or small-scale subsistence that ties directly into cultural traditions. Space and privacy are constants, and communities often develop strong support networks to handle harsh winters and geographic separation. This sense of mutual reliance fosters resilience as much as the climate demands it. For many Alaskans, the trade-off is clear. They accept the cost of higher prices, sunlight extremes, and isolation in exchange for opportunity, landscape, and independence. In 2025, Alaska continues to reflect both sides of this equation. Its land is vast, but its population is thin. Its resources are strong, but its industries unstable. Its environment is severe, but it appeals precisely because of that severity. Growth is possible in Anchorage, Fairbanks, and around military bases or renewable projects, but the overall density will remain among the lowest in the nation. Alaska is unlikely ever to resemble more crowded states, and that is part of what defines its role. Rather than measuring success by population totals, Alaska highlights how space, resilience, and specialization sustain communities even in extreme conditions. It will remain sparsely populated, not because it lacks opportunity, but because temperature, darkness, and geography push back against mass settlement. For those who do stay, this produces a unique lifestyle found nowhere else in America. This unique mix of strengths and constraints makes Alaska a lens for understanding broader themes across sparsely populated states. Its challenges, climate, distance, and economic concentration, mirror obstacles visible elsewhere, even if in less extreme form. And its steady niche opportunities, from tourism to military support to renewable projects, show how emptiness and adaptation coexist. These dynamics set up the bigger picture we need to look at next, where similarities and differences across all 9 of these least dense states reveal common lessons about why they remain so empty and what they might mean for the country's future. Challenges and opportunities of the empty states. When you step back and look at all 9 of America's least populated states together, patterns appear that show both their vulnerabilities and their possibilities. The challenges are real climate infrastructure gaps and affordability pressures, but each is paired with opportunities shaped by new technology, shifting migration trends, and local adaptations. This mix makes the story of emptiness less about absence and more about how people weigh trade-offs between space and services. Climate change sits at the center of those trade-offs. Researchers point out that climate-driven migration is complex and uneven, not a simple matter of people leaving one place and moving to another permanently. For states across the northern plains and New England, winters have in some cases become slightly less severe, making life marginally easier. At the same time, new risks have appeared. Along Maine's coast, higher seas and storm surges threaten fisheries and housing. In Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas, drought and wildfire risk reduce farm productivity while also limiting outdoor recreation, two major economic backbones. Alaska experiences both extremes. Reduced ice creates openings for new Arctic shipping lanes and resource development, but warming also erodes permafrost and destabilizes native communities. The Columbia research notes that where climate makes areas more livable, migration can follow, but it also stresses that rising risks create new reasons for people to leave. The emptiest states are testing grounds for this dynamic, where adaptation is as important as attraction. Remote work and digital infrastructure form a second major reshaping force. Before the pandemic, many of these states had to watch young people leave for larger metro areas because jobs were concentrated far away. By 2025, broadband funding through the bipartisan infrastructure law has extended service into rural counties once considered out of reach. Professional workers with portable jobs now log in from towns in Vermont, parts of rural Maine, or expanding hubs like Bozeman, Montana. In North and South Dakota, digital agriculture uses broadband to tie farms to data-driven technologies, keeping some younger families in place. These shifts don't erase the realities of long winters or limited hospitals, but they reduce the isolation that once made relocation impossible. Emptiness becomes somewhat less intimidating when you can connect to work and clients without moving to Boston, Denver, or Seattle. Still, access remains fragile. In Alaska, many remote villages depend on satellites for internet and endure slow connections. In parts of rural Wyoming, mountainous terrain makes broadband difficult to deliver consistently. Even in states that have expanded coverage, affordability of service remains a barrier for households with limited income. These limits show that while remote work creates new possibilities, it cannot completely change how geography shapes daily life. For every family using digital tools to justify living away from cities, there are others deterred by the inconsistency of those same tools. Affordability rounds out the third key dynamic. Compared to the country's crowded coastal states, emptier regions advertise lower housing prices and lower tax burdens. That message resonates with retirees leaving Boston or New York for small towns in Maine, or entrepreneurs building businesses in South Dakota where taxes are minimal. But affordability is relative. Bozeman, Burlington, and parts of coastal Maine prove that once outside professionals arrive with urban-level salaries, housing markets heat up. Local residents end up squeezed, competing for homes in regions that once prided themselves on stability. This is the dual edge of affordability. It draws in newcomers, but can undercut the very residents who maintained the communities during decades of low growth. Examples illustrate the broader patterns clearly. Climate challenges are visible in Alaska, where warming alters both opportunity and risk in ways that affect whether people stay, leave, or adapt. Remote work shifts are shaping Vermont towns that had previously faced decades of decline, stabilizing schools and economies with only a few dozen new families. Affordability debates echo in Montana, where growth has brought prosperity but also priced teachers and service workers out of home ownership. Each state highlights one piece of the larger puzzle: climate, infrastructure, affordability. Inside those three drivers lies the story of why emptiness persists yet also shifts. Healthcare access connects all three themes. Climate extremes make medical needs higher in some areas, but low density limits the number of facilities. Remote work keeps residents in rural regions, but without hospitals nearby, families with children or chronic illnesses may leave. Affordability draws retirees, but those same retirees may find themselves with longer travel times to reach specialists. Whether in the frozen interior of Alaska, the plains of the Dakotas, or the forests of northern Maine, the same reality repeats. Distance magnifies vulnerability. Modern technology helps but has not solved this fundamental gap. Education adds another example of the trade-off. Remote work can stabilize enrollment, but rural schools often cannot provide the same courses or activities as urban ones. Families consider whether the advantages of lower costs, open land, and calmer lifestyles outweigh the sacrifices in opportunity for children. Young people who leave for universities in larger states face stronger markets elsewhere, fueling a cycle of outward migration. These patterns reinforce why low density persists. Even with new inflows, the outflows remain real. At the same time, opportunities specific to emptiness continue to open. Vast land allows for large-scale energy projects such as wind farms across North Dakota or solar fields in southern Wyoming. Entrepreneurs in South Dakota use affordable facilities to launch niche manufacturing or service-based businesses. Retirees in Maine, Delaware, or Vermont see property values stretch further than in urban centers while still retaining access to cultural and recreational life. Alaska presents wilderness that is unmatched, attracting both adventurous residents and tourism that keeps local businesses afloat. Each of these cases shows how emptiness, while constraining, can also be a resource. One comparative insight frames the issue clearly. A large share of U.S. land is classified as low density, even though most people cluster into a relatively small handful of regions. The emptiest states simply sit at the sharpest end of that spectrum. Together, they remind us that America's future is shaped both by overcrowded metros and by places where territory is almost limitless but people remain few. These parallel realities build the contrast that determines migration patterns over time. The lessons of the empty states are straightforward. Climate does not always soften or harden life, it reshapes the rules unevenly. Remote work does not erase isolation, but it reduces barriers enough to give people new choices. Affordability is both a magnet for newcomers and a concern for residents who face rising housing pressures. These are the trade-offs: open space versus infrastructure, tax savings versus lost services, independence versus limited access. No single factor explains why emptiness remains, but together they outline a landscape where opportunity lives side by side with constraint. These 9 states are not simply empty, they are laboratories where America's next steps are tested first. They absorb stress from climate, experiment with incentives, and quietly prove whether digital work can actually remap where people live. If they succeed, it will not be through rapid population gains, but through refining the balance between who comes, who stays, and what opportunities remain accessible. Empty space, in this way, becomes functional rather than forgotten. So here's the challenge. These states highlight opportunity born of emptiness, but also reveal the limits of how far that opportunity goes. In the long run, the debate becomes personal. Would you pick space or convenience? Which trade-off matters more for where you would choose to live? Let us know your answer in the comments, because the balance between those two choices is what these states test every day. And as we take a final step back, the question becomes even bigger. What do these emptiest states reveal not just about themselves, but about the path the country may follow next? America's emptiest states highlight a simple truth: low population does not mean low potential. Each one shows how space, climate, and economy shape choices differently, and how trade-offs determine whether people see opportunity or obstacle. Empty states are not empty of potential. Each holds trade-offs that might make it the right move for certain people in 2025. If you're curious, check local cost of living and healthcare access before making a move. Which of these 9 states would you try living in for a year, and why? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this exploration. Which of these states surprised you most?